and probably more to come. So at Dragonfly Academy, and we have some courses, and love to chat about those as well.
We don't have
At some
time.
point, we have lots of
We
time.
have to communicate. Communication today.
We have to get all the logistics out of the way, and then we can.
We finally got it live streamed
Okay, perfect.
on yeah, we're live streaming on Facebook and YouTube.
Except, isn't it muted there?
Welcome. It's muted for us.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully. If not, you won't get it today.
People can't hear us. Oops.
All right. So yes, we have lots of things on the go, but one of the things that we have on the go today, I was kind of signing a contract for technology, and I'm like, oh wait, I need one more license, and I'm like, our team is growing really fast.
Yeah.
Right. And
Ariane's
been there
for
with
like years.
Yeah.
Like what, 4 years now?
Yeah.
2019 it was. Yeah.
So 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's just been us and Ariane for 5 years.
Yeah.
And now it's growing and growing and lots and more people. And so Faizan's getting everybody email addresses. That's just happening today.
Yeah. So we so Ariane's been holding on with all of our changes but the team's growing, and one of the team members is obviously Ariane, and Ariane recently also had a big accomplishment, which she's worked hard for.
Yeah.
So you want to quickly talk about that?
So Ariane is now a registered clinical counselor with the British Columbia Association for Clinical Counselors, which means that if people see her, they might be covered by their extended health insurance plans. And so that's a huge milestone, and we've been working towards it for a while and got all the hours and all the forms and all the reference letters, and probably feels really good. Hey, Ari, to just
it was a long time coming, because I was doing it alongside full-time working, and so it was good. Accomplishment.
So I think part of it is we want to highlight, and we've mentioned this before on this webinar here, is our hope when we started this was to share our knowledge, share what we're going through. And so you recorded a conversation with Lucas for our YouTube video this week.
So for those who don't know, Lucas is our other therapist. He's a transpersonal therapist. He's been in the field for almost 25 years, and has worked kind of in mainstream mental health, and now is in practice with us, and does his specialty areas are men's work and addictions and recovery. So that's kind of his space.
Right. And so part of that conversation that the two of you were having was around how therapists are human beings. So they go through their own challenges with communication and whatnot. And one of the things that was interesting, at least for me, right, when, like I said, when we started this, we wanted to share our knowledge. We didn't want to make ourselves into gurus. We don't know everything, and we don't practice perfectly everything that we talk about either. We stumble, we fall, we scratch our knees, get up and try again, but that's part of the game here. And it's not that we're that far advanced. I think sometimes we look at therapists, so that's where I wanted to start with the two of you, was just around like there's this perspective of a therapist that
like a perception,
like a perception that the therapist knows it all. And so when you're in a session, right, and people come to you for any of the issues, but including communications, right, how do you bypass that? Because sometimes the perception is that this person knows it all and can work it. I can't, right? I can never be like that.
Well, I know for myself, and Ari, you can tell me kind of how you do this, but I know for myself, I really make it a point to let my clients know that I'm not perfect, and that I struggle with things too. And so there's a technique in therapy called self-disclosure. So that's something that Lucas and I talked about, which is where you actually deliberately talk about yourself and give examples from your own life to support the client. So it's not about like, oh, now you get to help me. Like it's not that. It's really to build that kind of common bond and that humanity, that shared humanity with your client, that we all, and because I think it's dangerous to think that any other person has all the answers, right? And we don't want our clients, I know for myself, like I don't want our clients thinking that I have something that they can't access, right? I really believe, and I think Aria and you'd agree too, that people have what they need inside, right? Our job is to just help them quiet the noise and get back in touch with that. But we're not the solution for anybody, right? I'm not the solution for everybody. What do you think, Ariane, about that?
Absolutely. I think that I've always found when there is a little bit of self-disclosure in the session, it really just kind of bonds the client, like it builds that rapport. And I think that's important because if they think that you have all the answers and they don't, that's going to seem like unattainable. But that's not, I think, the way that we practice. I think, like you mentioned, we want the client to feel empowered and to feel like it is within them. We just are there to support them to get to that place where they realize it's within them. And that's when it, as a therapist, feels the most rewarding, I would say, is when you see that client realize, oh, I can do this, or I have done that before. Or
have you found with certain communities, because I know like from people from my like cultural community, there's a little bit of at the beginning sometimes an expectation of the expert, or like you go to a doctor and doctor gives you like a prescription, and there's kind of that idea that you're the expert and you're going to fix the problems. Have you kind of run across that as well?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's a lot of, what do you think? Or, I think they're so, the person has reached a point where they do want that support, and you appear to be the subject matter expert in it. But I like to work collaboratively with the client where we can come up with a solution together, because what I think may not, I have my own life experiences, my own attachment styles, and everything else. So it's not, my opinion's not what's going to get them to where they want to be. It's getting to those solutions together. Yeah.
So the two of you started the webinar before the webinar started, talking about something, which I'm like, hold it. Let's start the webinar.
Stop.
So do you want to kind of reintroduce that and,
Sure.
maybe share it with the rest of us?
So Ariana and I were talking about how like communication and some different elements to communication, and you had brought up, Ariane, about nonviolent communication, which I think would be so interesting for you to share with our group. And I suggested that something we might chat about is differences in who you're communicating with, because I think sometimes people have like, we have a certain skill with communicating maybe with our colleagues or strangers, or, like our kids' teacher, or, these different people. But when it comes to family, like immediate family members, like our parents or our siblings, our children, our grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, it feels like sometimes there's a little bit of a different flavor in communication. So I thought maybe we would start with that. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about nonviolent communication, like as a concept, and then we could go into that kind of exploration of the differences.
Definitely. So nonviolent style of communication is something that I remember learning about in school, but now that we're on the topic of self-disclosure, I kind of tapped into it again recently in terms of how to communicate with my fiance. I thought that it would be helpful to go back to that tool, because sometimes we can take what someone says and that's just, an opinion or a little critique, or, something that's so small, but we can attach so much meaning to it. And then that could be as a result of upbringing, intergenerational stuff, and coming from two different worlds, two different styles of upbringing. Maybe one family was a lot more relaxed, so making certain comments would be just, make the comment, move on. Whereas perhaps in my family, it wasn't. Like if a comment was made, it was kind of, a little bit of a stinger and would last a little bit longer. So I tapped back into this tool, and I thought it was really interesting. And once I tapped back into it, I've been using it with clients as well. So the intention is that when you're receiving feedback, to be able to receive it like with empathy. So it's not it's not necessarily a blame or a criticism, but more so I have a worksheet here that we can maybe send later too. But for example, being able to observe, see, hear, remember, that this doesn't necessarily contribute to your identity. For example, whatever the criticism is, perhaps the person said that, you always, leave the dishes out or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person or you're not worthy or all these things that we can attribute, but perhaps it's just a roommate issue. So, looking at things as a roommate issue as opposed to a partner and a fundamental issue that your partner is, saying to you, or saying about you. I think that we attach a certain meaning, and think that this is about my identity. Whereas separating things and thinking, okay, maybe these are just roommate issues. These are just factual roommate issues happening. We can work it out. We're still partners. No one's going anywhere,
I
Yeah.
like that, roommate issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the living with another. and
Yeah, you're
how that works out.
compartmentalizing it a little bit, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
let me there's a couple of questions that I have here. So you kind of talked about, right, like certain families are able to do it a certain way, and the other family might be like you were talking about, if a comment was made, it was taken as a sting, and it was like it was probably ruminated on for for a few days, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is that even in those instances, right, it's possible still that there are certain people within those families that do it differently, right? So some, like, the family says it's okay to make comments and just move on, but there might be one person or one child who can't move on. Is that, and so what's the impact of that?
Absolutely. I mean, each member of the family can have a different, attachment style or a way that they've internalized things, perhaps had different traumas. So it definitely, each family member can process things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And like what would, from your perspective, what would be the impact of somebody not fitting in really like that? Right, like so if a family does it a certain way, so like my family did it a certain way, but I didn't really appreciate it, but I just had to go along with it. So what would be the impact of that long term?
So if I'm getting your question, you're asking the family system, everybody communicates a certain way,
Yeah.
but an individual in that family doesn't really match that self-communication
Right,
and how that
but
would impact that person.
yeah, but has to do it just to fit in.
Hmm.
What's the long-term impact of that?
Oh, that's a
It's
great question.
tricky.
That is
Yeah.
I'm like, let's I would ask you a few more questions if you were my client. So do you want to
That's a
like
good one, yeah.
go a little deeper with this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so is this like a personal, like, is this something you experienced?
Not about communication, but yeah, about other things.
So
How,
family does it a certain way, you do it
Yeah.
a different way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then not to say they were wrong or right, but it's just,
So
but I've worked on it, so now I'm like now trying to go back a few
well,
years.
I think it can affect a couple things. So one is a people's sense of belonging in the family. Like, I don't fit, I'm different,
Mm,
they're different. So a feeling of maybe differentness or incongruence with the family, that can happen. Maybe a little bit of judgment. They're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, they're wrong. And trying to figure out who's right and wrong rather than seeing it as just different styles. It's like we need to figure out who's right or wrong with it. That could be another thing that happens.
Egos, I think.
Say that again.
Egos play a part as well.
Can you say more about that?
With the right and wrong, like you were saying, I think that becomes a big factor. And you can lose sight of what you're talking about, for instance, and it can be more about, no, I want to prove my point. I was right. And the other
Right.
person is, bringing
So
their.
it's not about communication anymore. Now it's about proving you're right, proving your point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more like a competition then in that sense. Whereas
right.
I think it's so important to see that we are all on the same team. If it's partnership, if it's a couple. I think with family, if in terms of kids and parents, that could be a little bit more tricky too. But yeah, the pointing fingers doesn't help.
How for kids and parents, because you work with young people, right, with youth, and how do you have any like golden nuggets that you wish parents would know about how to communicate with their young people, their young adults or their teens?
I think it's again, sometimes there can be that enmeshment, so that blending of, you know, your child is then an extension of you. So if they are exploring their identity in different ways, so let's say you wanted them to be a lawyer, but they want to become an artist, for example, and that just doesn't sit well with you because you really wanted them to be a lawyer. But I think it's remembering that your child is also their own, like a human, a separate human from you, and they can have different opinions and different feelings, and that's all part of their developmental growth. So actually, when we clash too much and not, you know, there has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance of being authoritative, right?
Authoritative, yeah.
Authoritative, but also letting them explore. Because if you kind of shelter too much, then that you're going to stunt that development. You that is part
So
of their
what
development.
happens though, Ariane, for those of us who are grown, but maybe we were parented that way, right? Where the parent was very kind of in charge and it was there.
Yes.
Like I know there's a whole generation of parenting that was like that, right? Where
Totally.
parents were in charge, parents were right. You have to listen. If you don't listen, there's something wrong with you. And you get punished or you get ridiculed or scolded. So for those of us who maybe on the call who are adults who kind of were parented that way and now have problems with communication, what advice would you give?
I think noticing it is the first step. So if you're noticing that there's a problem, that's good. You're on the right track. Because if without noticing, then, you know, that's just going to keep continuing that cycle. So to notice that there is a problem. And then it's always essentially a little bit of an internal work. So looking at where this is coming from, why are you feeling triggered, for instance? And I know, for instance, with my parents, they've recently started to do that a little bit more. And my dad will be like, oh, okay, when I'm saying this, actually, it's because I experienced this in child. So he's actually reflecting, which is really interesting because I experienced a similar thing to what you're saying, where parenting style was a certain way. So I think if it can be that ability to reflect and do some internal work, then you're bringing something valuable to the table, to that relationship.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I was just, before we move forward, you can obviously add your thoughts, but one of the things is like it kind of comes back to accountability, right? Like we have to do the work. We can't expect our parents to do the work.
Right.
Our parents,
It's
for
a
example,
nice bonus if they do, but
yeah, and our parents may or may not be even around, right? So,
Yes.
but we still have to do that work. And before you kind of share your perspective, for anybody that's joined on Zoom, if anybody's watching live on YouTube or Facebook, if you want to ask questions today, please do. Otherwise, I'll just keep on asking questions here.
so for Zoom, people can write in your questions in the
Yes.
chat.
Yeah.
I think the other streams, can people write questions?
Yeah, they can put it in their chat. We've
Keep
got
an
it
eye on
open.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll keep an eye. But yeah, the Zoom is the first one that we would address. So anyways, asking questions. Today is the last day for communication.
Yeah. So anything on the topic of communication that we've talked about over the last month, or anything new that we missed that you want to know about, please ask your questions in the chat.
Okay, great. So let's quickly talk what Ariane shared before about not making it my identity, right? So that which is a great one. So that again, the responsibility is on me, and the one getting the feedback to not make it about me. What is the other what can the other person do if I'm the one giving feedback? What can I do to not make it to adhere to the nonviolent?
I will pass that over to you. So if I'm the communicator, I'm trying to deliver a message. How do I do that in a way that's not with the nonviolent principles?
That's a good question. So you know, and this is assuming that both are wanting to work together on this model. But typically, again, it would be focusing on, so that the communicator should be focusing on I statements. So I feel this way when this happens. And then that can take away any element of an attack. So to say, I feel overwhelmed when you leave the dishes on the counter, or I feel that you don't care when you forget to call me on your way home, or something, you know, like that.
Rather than why do you keep the dishes on the
Why
counter?
do you always keep the dishes on? You always, you know, like
Right.
and that can reduce the probability of feeling that it may be a personal attack. So that for the communicator is something that I always recommend, is if you
What
can.
about, can you speak a little bit to like nonverbal elements of communication?
So I think that's also something that's really, we don't notice that we're doing, but even sitting, so let's, for example, if you're sitting with your arms crossed and yeah, or you're
Angry face. I'm demonstrating.
yeah, yeah. And that energetically, you can feel that. You can feel that the person is closed off. You can feel there's a barrier between you two. It's just even something that I find helpful is if you're having a serious conversation and you know that it could potentially lead to conflict, if you can sit closer to one another and just even have like one hand on the person's lap, or you know, so you remember that this is, you know, this is my partner. This is, we're, you know, we're talking. This doesn't mean that we're getting into this like battle and one person needs to win. So I think with the nonverbal, it's, yeah, trying to keep your energy open for both. I think the receiver as well, because, you know, you could also, as the receiver, you know, close off, and then you're creating this dynamic.
And I think that nonverbal, those cues are something that we're trained in, right? As therapists, like we're really trained to watch our clients and notice those cues and those kind of unconscious communications that they're delivering. And I know that as a therapist, when you're in the room with a client, you have to be really aware of your own body language, tone, energy, even your own thoughts, because they send, like, there's a vibe, right? There's these micro expressions that happen on our faces when we have certain responses. So it's like we really have to, we've kind of studied how to do that in therapy.
Yeah.
Doesn't always translate in my life outside of the therapy room.
It's hard, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So somebody's just asking if we live near Prince George in Seminar. So I think we're about 8-9 hours drive from Prince George. So not really close by.
I think Prince George is more north, right?
Yeah. But if you want to drive and come see us in Seminar, we would love it. So I think part of it is from a communication perspective, right? Is that we struggle communicating depending on what's going on in life. So let me give you an example. Today I've been on like calls, and I've been on like just even Slack channel, right? Like just messaging people and just constantly for the last 8 hours, just been on calls. And so Syra walks in and I'm just grumpy. Like I had to walk away. I'm like, I'm just grumpy for no reason, because I know I have another meeting after this, right? Like we have this parent meeting, and then I have another call till like 11 o'clock at night. So I'm like, I'm just zombied out. Too much communication for me today. So when I know when I'm communicating in that mode, like obviously I have to notice it, sit with it, figure out, okay, how do I get past it so I can, I can show up on here without flipping the mice and keyboards and table because the stream was not working. But so I noticed that, right? And because you're here, Ariane, like one of the things I've noticed is when people are in pain, whether that's physical, emotional, but even like the physical pain, right? Like it's difficult, right? Like to keep all these communication tools and check. So one of the I know one of the areas you you have expertise is in kind of this chronic pain management, right? So how does communication get impacted, and why does it get impacted?
When people are in pain.
Yeah, when people like, why can't I keep it together? Like it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, so like that's an interesting one for me. I was thinking about this morning.
Well, when you're in pain, you're exhausted. So being in pain exhausts you. It can, you're physically exhausted, you're mentally exhausted. A task that would take, person X an hour, person Y with chronic pain, it might take them, double that time, 2.5 hours, for instance. So you're at a little bit of a disadvantage, but it's learning to live with it and readjust your expectations and the expectation of those around you. And I think it's a matter of you yourself, the person that has chronic pain, if they're at a level where they feel comfortable sharing, I think it's sharing right off the bat, just kind of relieves you. And because the person with chronic pain, and I've had that before myself, so I'm speaking of out of experience, you have a high expectation of yourself and you want to be able to perform a certain way. But if you have certain issues, you may not be able to. And once you lay that kind of expectation down that, oh, I'm sorry, I can't because of this reason, you feel a sense of relief because you don't have to carry this shame or this burden on your shoulders that I have this thing that no one knows about and I have to pretend like I'm, working at the same speed as person X, but I'm not. So it's a lot to carry on your own. So I would say, for the person with chronic pain, my number one recommendation would be, if you feel comfortable, if you are at that level where you feel comfortable to share, you don't have to get into details, but just to say, I have certain, physical challenges going on. And so it might take me longer to do such and such, or I may be a little bit off today. I'm having a flare up, for instance. These things can really help alleviate your own pressures. So then you might not be as agitated. Your brain can think a little bit more clearly.
Because you're not just trying to perform wellness.
Exactly. Because if you're not trying to be in this performative mode where you can actually just relax and be yourself, and then you're not going to be as agitated. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that similar for somebody's in emotional pain?
Well, I think about people who are grieving, right? And it's like Ariane said, that takes so much energy, right? It's tiring to process emotion. It's a tiring. I know people sometimes after a session in therapy, they're like, "Oh, I'm so tired," right? Because just facing your feelings and expressing your feelings, and it takes it out of us, right? So I think from an emotional pain perspective, I know that people who are, if you want to take that chronic, grief is the closest thing I could think of it to chronic emotional pain, maybe, or at least a pain that lasts for a period and it's unpredictable when it's going to come, when it's going to go. So I think, when people, I know I have with clients that I've worked with who are in a process of grieving, they don't feel like themselves and they don't feel like their best selves. And sometimes they're snapping at their loved ones, or sometimes they're just kind of disengaged from the world because they feel like, it's too hard. So that might be, I haven't read any research on it. So I can't tell you like for sure, but just like from my clinical experience, that's been my.
Yeah, I guess where I'm trying to get to, right, is, and thanks to both of you for sharing. We don't know where people are, right? Like when we're communicating with them, and we've talked about this, in communication, as much as possible. I think it's important that we be generous and we give people benefit of the doubt. So things, like what Gottman says is, the Gottman research around fighting, right? Like, so when we say you always, right? Just make the fight about this today, and be generous, right? Allow them. I think Brene Brown talks about, right, like that they're doing their best.
Yeah,
that they have the best intention, right? So and a lot of times that alone can be like, okay, they're going through stuff, and it's okay that I don't need to make it about me, per se.
Like when people are driving and driving really slowly,
Hmm,
I have a certain person in my life who gets really frustrated when people are
right.
driving slowly.
Listen,
And then
I'm
I'll
from Chicago. I've gotten better.
you have lots of reasons and lots of
No, that's not a
excuses.
good reason. It's a horrible reason. I'm just saying I've gotten better.
But there's that piece about, and I'm also one who's like, well, you never know. Maybe they're in a fight with their mom, or maybe they're a new driver, or maybe they're
Yeah.
scared, or maybe this is a new car and they don't know how to, right? Like you like giving people the benefit of the doubt that there could be a
Yes.
lots of reasons why this person's not driving to your standard.
Well,
I'll
I
give
think
them the
as
benefit of the doubt as
therapists,
long as they're in a different lane. No.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think as therapists, we are constantly doing that. We're always giving people benefit of the doubt, and that's our role. We look at context, and so
Mhm.
we'll be like, well, maybe this person's behaving this way because they are anxious, or maybe this person is experiencing depressive symptoms, or
Mhm. Mhm.
you just never know what somebody is going through. And I think that also goes back to the nonviolent strategy, where being able to empathize that what you're receiving is not necessarily criticism.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's a question. I was wondering if mirroring, paraphrasing in communication helps. How can we know which technique should be applied? Ariane?
Me?
Try
Um,
all the techniques until something works.
It's like throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Something's gonna stick.
um, Great techniques, great. As therapists, we use those techniques, but in real life too, it's very helpful. I saw Dr. Syra do that with Faison just like a couple minutes ago with the question he asked. You were like, I'm hearing you say this. Is this what you mean with your question? And so it becomes second nature where you do that in your communication, and you just want to make sure, because again, how you're interpreting what the person is saying is based off of your own communication style, but
Mhm.
not necessarily is that what the person means to say. So I think it's great to clarify. I think especially in with a conversation that could potentially be rocky, it's very important to just make sure to check, what I think I'm hearing you say is this, is that really what you meant, or please clarify for me, something like that.
And tone, right? Because you could be like, so what you're saying is
Right.
blah 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 blah.
Yes.
That's not exactly a clear, like
Oh,
it's
really?
Yeah.
I'm working on it. It's definitely the relationship. But that tone matters, right? So because we could be using all the right techniques or skills, but if our energy is still one of that competition of I want you to see how right I am, then it falls flat, right?
It can, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the same can apply for mirroring. I think that mirroring is great to model the type of communication you're looking for. But also, if you're not both working at it, you can become resentful if you're constantly trying to mirror and the person is not receiving.
Can you
Or
describe what mirroring is for people who might not know that term?
Yeah, so I think the best way to describe it is you behave or communicate in the way that you would like the other person to, behave or communicate. So if you would like to receive more help in the kitchen, perhaps you help the person with the garbage, or whatever. I keep using these household examples, but it's just the easiest one that comes to mind. But yeah, so being able to model what you would like, or even with communication or boundaries, if you start to assert boundaries, saying no, saying how you really feel, then the hope is that the other person will follow suit. And oftentimes they do, especially when you start to set boundaries. I think people do then follow suit. Would you say the same? Yeah.
Mirroring, another way, so again, a technique in therapy that we use is something called congruence, right? So looking at what's happening in the client and matching it. So if the client's like really kind of mellow and kind of talking in that tone, you kind of match that and kind of join them, right? If the client's kind of like excited and exuberant about something, you kind of join them in that.
Yeah.
And when I've seen so often where people are talking to each other, it's like they're not matching each other. Like they're each wanting to do what they want to do, and they're not really looking at where's the third thing. Like there's you, there's me, and then there's a space between us, and entering into that space to match the other person. And not like in an artificial way. It's not like if you're in a bad mood, you're not just gonna like suddenly perk up, but it helps people feel heard when you match them, when you kind of match them where they're at.
And where does so paraphrasing in communication is one thing, but also repeating back, is that part of mirroring? Where you repeat back exactly what was said?
What I heard you say was,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
you
part
try
of
to
it.
use their words, not interpret, right? Like that's one of the things we work with the couples on, because they'll have their interpretation, like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's not what was said.
Yeah.
The word was used was X.
Mhm.
Wasn't X plus Y. Right? Like,
Right.
but it's being that clear,
Using
like,
the same language.
yeah,
Yeah.
just to make sure the other person feels
And
heard.
also, again, like if we're talking about family members, it can get sticky because that you could also use that language in the future to wound them, right? So it's like, they might use a specific word or a specific idea in this conversation, then I don't get to use it later to hurt them in the future. Right? Well, you're not like whatever. I can't even think of something like an example.
Well, you're a therapist. I can't believe you can't figure this
Yeah,
out.
Faizan's never said that to me in 17 years of 16
I
and a half
haven't.
years. Never said that. It's like
I've said a lot of.
makes me feel so good because you could have.
I've said a lot of.
You could have said, really? And you're a therapist, but he's never said that.
I've said a lot of stupid
That's
things.
good.
That's not one of them.
That's not. Thank goodness, right? Because it's true. Like,
Yeah.
I've had other family members be like, "Oh, would you talk to your client like that?"
Yeah.
Like,
Mm.
right? But it just makes me feel bad. It doesn't actually
Yeah.
join. It doesn't like get us closer. Those kinds of comments.
Right. So we've talked about kind of and this is part of like we talked about kind of standing in the fire, remember, with somebody, which means when I'm in the fire with somebody, I can't make it about my identity. I can't be judgmental. I have to make sure that I stay here and that they still
You can't like take notes for ammunition for later.
no, that they still feel that they belong in this conversation, that they belong with me, that this won't have there won't be repercussions afterwards, right? Like, so it's all of those things that kind of show up, and we're able to kind of stand there and take, but also give with that same energy. So somebody's kind of sharing.
Yeah, so
their
somebody
experience
made a
of that.
comment. They said, yesterday I had a chance to talk to my husband regarding planning for the summer. He said something that would have been a trigger in the past. And I reminded him that let's stay present in this conversation at the moment, and it worked.
Yeah.
So you didn't let yourself get pulled back into,
Right, so for that person, if you're willing, right, like if you want to share, was it because you didn't get triggered, you were able to get through? Like, because just because I read like, hey, let's stay in the present doesn't mean you will stay in the present, right?
Right.
So like what do you think got through to your husband? If you're willing to share, that'd be great. Okay, so first of all, if there are any other questions, that'd be now's the time. So as part of communication, we've discussed obviously some ways of communicating, taking feedback, giving feedback.
I hate that word feedback. Can I tell you?
Love feedback.
Can I just like do a little rant for a moment about feedback?
Sarah loves feedback.
Okay.
Especially when asked for.
Yes. So feedback to me, sometimes in my experience, what has happened for me is people will say, can I give you some feedback? And what they're really trying to say is, can I tell you something that's going to hurt your feelings, but I don't want your feelings to get hurt?
Can I tell you did something wrong?
Can I tell you what you did wrong, but don't get mad at me because I'm just trying to be helpful. So that word feedback just like, it just gets under my skin.
Okay.
How
So
would
we
it
can-
better be communicated? How would that better be communicated?
Well, something that my mom does with me, which is really great. She's like, can you stand in the fire for a second? So then I know it's going to be hard to hear, It might hurt my
Oh, I
feelings,
like that.
but she wants to get something through.
And that's a specialized language that you have to like get through, right?
Yeah.
But even like for us,
You can
like
stand in the fire with me.
I actually ask people, hey, do you
have
do you mind if
something
I
to
share
share.
something with you right
Yeah.
now? And
And it,
because especially if the person's not doing this work, I know they might be struggling with boundaries.
Yeah.
I say, and no is a perfect answer.
Yeah.
right, giving
Right?
them permission.
So even I do this with the kids, I do it with you.
And I say no
Yeah.
a lot. I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I don't want to hear it. No,
Yeah.
thanks. Like, not right now. Or I say, I'm not in the space right now. Can we talk about this? If you have feedback, today's not the day, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Yeah,
Oh.
I get it one day out of the year for feedback. Feedback
Just
provider.
write in your journal
So
and then rip it up and throw it.
so I write all these cards for her.
There's another comment or question?
Oh, yeah. Someone's saying, I'm not a therapist, a parent. Sometimes I don't know how to continue. I get lost. Can you help?
Mm.
Ariane, we'll give that to you for the
Hmm.
parents.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the particular challenges. But yeah, it's hard when emotions are involved. And I think that with parenting, even more so than, you know, a husband or a wife or a partner, it's different.
Because the balance is different, right? The power, the roles, it's all different.
Well,
yeah,
the role is different early on, and then there sometimes the role is reversed, right? When the kids
Mhm.
have the power and the parents don't,
yeah, yeah.
right? So the
definitely.
dynamics keep on changing.
Mhm.
So one thing, if I may share my
Yeah.
personal experience, right? One of the, I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it.
Yes,
I
you're not
admit,
good at it yet.
I'm working on it.
Working on it.
I'm getting better day by day, getting better. One thing that I've realized is I can't make it about me as a parent, because a lot of it is when I'm discussing something, I need these children to do something. And if they don't do it the way I want them to do it, it means something about me as a parent.
Yes.
It means I'm a bad parent. It means people will think I have lost control of my kids, whatever, right? Like all the stories and then the cultural expectations, all of those things kind of add on. And I literally have to take that power away because
Mhm.
I'm not asking them to, put the dishes away in that sense, because then I'm asking them to make sure that they put the dishes away so I look good.
Mhm.
So I can tell people, oh yeah, my kids put the dishes away.
You know, that's funny you bring that up. Today we went to the store, went to Winners, and Rabia were checking out, and she's like making all these jokes, right? With the teller. She's like, there goes my college tuition. And like she was just joking. And this woman was laughing and laughing. And inside I was cringing because I would like that was not me as a kid. I was like quiet, obedient, like didn't make eye contact, like, but this girl's just like chatting, and the teller, she's like, so where do you get your humor from? She's like, is it you or is it her dad? I'm like, definitely her dad.
Aw.
But it's like allowing her to just be that kind of a person in the world
Exactly.
and not like shutting it down, and like still I had that like, ooh,
Yeah.
she's talking about it, and she's like,
Mhm.
but I had to just like, and then I was talking to Monique today about how we also don't want our children to like just run like animals, right? Like we're building citizens, and there's a way to behave, and so that balance of all of that, and also removing myself from the kind of child I was, and so not expecting my child to be like that as
That's the
well.
other big
Mhm.
is my own expectations. One story that I share is, we when our son was very young, and I used to take him to the place of worship, and I used to like really just hold on tight, like don't run, just stay here, like
Stay still, be
stay
quiet
still, be quiet.
at like 18 months.
And I had to, and thank God the religious leader called me out on it. One time I'm like, he's gonna call me, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, he was running around. He's like, you know what, he can run around. If you don't like it, you can leave. I'm like, oh, okay. That's not, but that's not the that's not the culture that I grew up in,
Yeah.
or that's not the background I grew up in, right? I grew up with that. After a while, after many years, actually, I realized, right, like I used to get slapped around in those places of worship when I was little.
Mhm.
For maybe not because I was running around, because I started raising my hands at the wrong time or whatever, right? Like it'd be crazy what they would do, right?
Yeah.
So I think a part of it is again not making it about me and realizing that it's about me. It's
Mhm.
taken a while. So this person who asked, right, like that they get lost. I don't know if this is helping or if you have a particular situation you want to type out quickly.
Mhm.
But
And
some,
also maybe
yeah.
the age of your child, because it's different if they're a
Mhm.
teenager, if they're
Yes.
5, if they're an adult child. So that would help us too. So that person who asked about the trigger in the conversation, they said, I think the even tone and energy helped. The button was pushed. However, I felt I was able to depress the button. So you're able to,
Right.
great. So your own
Wonderful.
internal
And you know,
thing.
so this is a great. A lot of people ask us, right? They come to these Monday meetings like, it's great to have this knowledge, but then when I get into these situations, how am I gonna right? How am I gonna actually do this work? But somebody's doing the work while they're getting triggered in the
Mhm.
conversation, right? This is
Right.
how,
Button was pushed,
yeah.
but somehow staying calm, staying even, able to like
But this is how, right? Like we
practice.
can't explain it. It's just you practice on at the good times, and then eventually during a supposed conflict situation, you're able to actually work through it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been
I-
building those networks, right?
Yeah, exactly. I always tell my clients that working on mental health is just like working on physical health. It is health. So if you injure a part of your body and you go to physical therapy, you have to consistently work on that part of your body to regain that muscle strength. So same thing with your mental health or your triggers, your emotional well-being, you have to keep working at it. And actually these triggers, that's amazing that the commenter noticed the trigger, because these triggers, they're actually, if we can reframe it and think of it as like little gifts for us, like that's the moment where we can actually work on this stuff. So that's the time where we can be like, okay, this is something, why is it happening? Even if we just step away, write it down. But this is the moment where you can actually start to rewire the brain.
Can you speak to that a little bit, Ariane, about the neuroscience of communication? Since that's your jam, the brain, your jam.
The brain. Yeah, so the brain is basically very malleable and flexible. So and this is kind of recent-ish research that we've learned that the brain can restructure itself with consistent work. So previously we thought that what we have, the issues we have, we're stuck with them, but we're thankfully not. So we can restructure our brain as long as we keep up with things. So as long as there's consistency with the frequency and the duration, then you can actually rewire. So for instance, the prefrontal cortex, which is where we call it the executive functioning center. That's where we assess information. That's where if we are reactive, it's because our prefrontal cortex is not necessarily, the firewall is not working properly. It's the emotions are going past the prefrontal cortex. It should be able to filter things out a little bit. So the more we practice, the more we utilize tools that are within us. So whether that's just pausing, deep breathing, when you notice, and I think the body is a really good barometer. When you notice physically you don't feel good in a conversation, in a setting, something is off, something is happening. That's probably a trigger. So to pause, to think about why this is making you feel the way it is. What are the thoughts you're thinking in that moment? These are some ways that you can work on rewiring your neurons.
Thank you. So we have more from that person about the being a parent. So they said, what should the end goal be? especially if the techniques backfire. Both do not agree, and especially if the argument would escalate. It sounds like maybe two different opinions or two different perspectives, trying to use some of these different techniques, but
How old are your children, this person that's writing? So just so we know, because again, like Sarah mentioned, I think there's
developmental
yeah,
milestones, right?
yeah. And I think if they're adults, there's the other problem, right? Like is the control sometimes and letting them come to you. But I don't know what the ages are. All of those things, all of those things matter. So we've got about 6 minutes left. Hopefully we'll get this last question
Mhm.
in. Anything you want to close the month with about communication?
Well, I want to talk about something that's coming up.
Yeah, well, we will talk
You'll
about
get to that? Okay.
Yes.
Let's see. I think that it's kind of what Ariane just said, that it's about practice, right? So it's knowing the information, having the tools kind of intellectually, but it's in the moment, practicing. That's actually where we're going to start seeing change. And I know when I work with clients and we kind of come up with a new tool, or we talk about breathing or the pause, and then when they practice it, then they come back like, oh, okay, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just an interesting idea that's like, oh yeah, it's just like going to the gym. You could have a gym membership
Yeah.
and it could be taking, $89 out of your account every month, and that's great. But if you don't actually show up at the gym to actually lift that weight, your body's not changing, right? So it's similar. Like, we can have all this content and this knowledge, if we're not actually using it,
Yeah.
then those muscles aren't change. Like, the brain isn't changing, right? Those
Exactly.
habits aren't reforming.
Mhm.
So that's, I think, would be my takeaway: is practice.
Yeah.
Good.
How about you, Ariane? Any
Yeah,
fun-
that and the physical connection is a big one. I think that we often lose sight of how much information our body tells us. So I think it's really important to notice how you're feeling in a situation, because if it's very strong reactions, chances are there could be other stuff. I think Brene Brown says something like, what I'm making this mean about myself is something like that. She has a statement like that. Don't quote me, it's not exactly verbatim, but essentially it's, what am I making this situation to mean about me? Or, why do I feel so strongly? I think that the physical component is huge. So once you start noticing that more, that's a huge start as well. Helpful, yeah.
And mine just would be about intention. I think when we're getting into a communication, what intention am I going with, right? Like, so in my earlier example with my children, right? Is it about me or is it actually about them? Right? Do I want them to be good citizens, or do I want them to show the world that I'm a good parent?
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not questioning the intentions, but the
But
intention
you just
matter.
like,
Yeah.
asking the question helps stop you sometimes.
Well,
from
yeah, and it matters
Yeah.
because, right, like we be like, I'm such an angel, I'm making it about them, but in reality, it's about me, and they pick up on it, right? Like, oh, this is about you, okay, whatever, right? Like,
Like the laundry yesterday. Oh, I just went on a rampage with my poor daughter. I'm like, you need to have that laundry folded today. And she's like, but I'll do it tomorrow. It's like, it better be done tomorrow. And then today we're driving home and she's like, Mama, we're getting home pretty late. I don't think I'm going to be able to have my laundry done. And I was like, yeah, like, what is the big deal? It could happen the next day, right? But I was like getting so caught up in like, it's gotta be, the rule must be followed. And it's like,
Yeah.
why?
Assigning a certain meaning to it.
Because if she doesn't follow my rule, then she doesn't respect me, or some story. I don't know what I made
the
him.
story I'm telling myself. I think that's what Brene Brown said. Something like
Story I'm telling myself.
yeah.
Yeah.
something like that.
So this person, quickly, we have a few minutes left, so I know you want to talk about something. The person that was asking a question about the parent, the child is in the early 30s. They've come together after living separate lives for about a decade. So they're
So move back in.
yeah, so they're moving in back together, or they're coming together kind of in the same area. That brings its own challenges, right? It's like this is a
You've kind of gone in your own ways, and now you're coming back as new people.
yeah. And I mean, if nothing else, obviously you can it's like you have to get to know this person as this person, not as your child,
Yeah.
right? Like, because especially if they've been away, they've grown, they've changed, they've picked up new habits, they've picked up new
Experience
personalities,
things.
they've experienced different things. So it's to actually get to know this person as that person and not as
Just
this
the
child.
role of
Like even with our kids, even they're not separate. But like the other day, I'm like, oh yeah, like my son is almost 15, not that 5-year-old, right? Like so, I'm like, but in my mind, I just separate. Like, who is this 15-year-old? I don't think I know him,
Yeah.
right? Like so,
anything to add, Ariane, on that one?
I think, yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking as well, is that they are their own kind of entity now, and they've, you know, especially 10 years, that's a long time to be on your own, the experiences they might have had, you know. It's, yeah, getting to know each other all over again, probably.
yeah.
And maybe looking at the parts of myself, if I was this parent, to say, maybe I'm not right. Like if they're doing their life a certain way, it doesn't have to be wrong because it's different than mine, right? It's just different than mine.
Yeah.
So again, we've said it's really hard to do some of this therapeutical work on on a webinar like this, but hopefully that helps. We've got less than a minute.
Okay,
You want
very quickly, you want to let everybody know March
16.
16th. I am teaming up with Texas from our team, who and the two of us are doing a workshop called Back to Basics, the 6 building blocks of spiritual alignment. And we're for the first time ever offering it both online and in person. So people who can't be here with us in the Shuswap area, you can come and join us online. It's $47, so it's very hopefully affordable. If you really want to be there and that's too much, to like just reach out to us, because we don't want anyone to not make it just for that. But we're trying to make it accessible, and it's kind of an intro to these 6 foundational principles, and some of them will be familiar to you. But if it's like, if we don't have one of these, we can end up kind of being a bit ungrounded as we move towards our spiritual growth journey. And if we're kind of unbalanced in certain ones of them, we might be too what we're finding with spiritual growth and spiritual development is there has to be room for the mystery. And so if you think you know everything, you kind of miss a lot of that. So we'll be talking Texas and Ice 2 hours. It's on a Saturday afternoon, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific. You can find out more on dragonflyacademy.ca. It's not totally like, we're still building the page and there'll be more information coming, but at least the basics of time and date and getting your registration, you can do that now. Dragonflyacademy.ca.
Awesome.
So that is my announcement.
All right. So we are done. Let me stop the recording.
Okay.
Thanks to everyone on the live stream. We'll say goodbye there.
Leave your comments if you're watching it after.